Hi, my name is Blayne Stewart. I am the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence at UACCB. And I thought this year, after I gave my presentation at ACC last year, I really thought it would be cool if I could offer a recording or some kind of something. And I never really got around to do it afterward, and I never found time to do it before. And I really wanted to do this in my nicer recording setup that I have at home. And then I decided I would just do it in the hotel room because I really wanted this to be a thing. So the presentation's tomorrow. And I decided that I would maybe potentially workshop it. So there may be some cuts. There may be me randomly kneeing the camera. I will include a video later that sort of shows how I did this. I'm a photographer and videographer as well, and my setup is hilarious. My laptop's on a chair, the camera's on a little tripod that I carry around with me and connected to the chair. So if I knee things, you get this really fun side-to-side movement. So if that happens and the camera shakes, you'll know why. My end goal is to eventually record a nicer, very put together version of this, but I thought I would give you something to review if you came and saw me, or if you wanted to share the presentation with somebody that wasn't able to be there. So I'm gonna start out with a story about my education philosophy or teaching philosophy. I'm trying to call it more of an education philosophy now rather than a teaching philosophy, because I don't teach quite as much, and while I've always referred to it as a teaching philosophy, and most people refer to it as a teaching philosophy, the truth is, no matter what you do in education, at whatever level, you really can benefit from an education philosophy, and we'll kind of talk about why. We had a new vice chancellor for academics, and we had an initiative on campus. I'm drawing a blank on what it was called, and I don't have it in my notes either, so it's not important to the story. So she had interviews with us, and I had known her for probably 15, 16 years. We had worked when I was a marketing person at a completely different institution. We had never worked in academics together. So our conversation started out with general conversation like you would expect it to. And then we started in on these kind of interview questions. And the end goal for the institution was we wanted to see the kinds of things that faculty members that had high retention rates and high pass rates sort of had in common. I guess the hypothesis was that there's probably some commonalities there that we might be able to use in other places on campus. So I happen to be one of those people. To this day, my wife was the institutional researcher at the institution, and I think she just plugged my name in there when she found out there was going to be an interview process, because she knew that I wasn't going to take it very well. I think she was just being mean to me. No, but my retention rates and pass rates were pretty high. So I was one of the top 10 or 12 that were being interviewed, which was cool. So we started having general conversations about what kinds of things do you do in your classroom? What do you see happening? How do you react to different situations? And then she asked me what my teaching philosophy was. And I just kind of sat there. And because we had known each other for so long, she just kind of sat there too. And after a little while, and now this is the thing I like to tell people when I tell this, is what I'm saying probably happened over the course of 45 seconds to a minute and a half. In my head, to this day, it felt like it was 20 minutes of me sitting there in silence. And she kind of looked at me and she said, "So it can be difficult if you've never really thought about it before." And I had been teaching 3 or 4 years at the time, and I was like, no, I hadn't really thought about it much. And she just kind of said, "Yeah, it can be hard." And then smiled and just looked at me. She was not letting me out of this. And my brain was going 900 miles an hour. And I was trying to figure out how to answer this question, seem professional, not say, "Can we just move on?" because I honestly have no idea how to answer this question. I was just racking my brain for I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. What do you mean I don't have a teaching philosophy? I was like, I have things I do, and all of this was going through my head. Again, I swear it was 20 minutes of her just waiting in silence for me to say something. So after a little while, I blurted out 2 words. I said, well, teach them. That's it. I said, teach them. And she kind of nods, and then we're back in silence. And I was like, oh crap. Okay, so how I need to explain what I mean by that, because obviously 2 words they're not a teaching philosophy by any means at all, right? So I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. And I started with, well, I really think that, at a community college, our job is to teach people, not just students, but our community members, our employees. I had been saying this to multiple people before. I just felt it was odd that we didn't provide more education to our employees in different kinds of ways. And that, I had been talking to some people that worked in community ed, and I had been learning about the ways that we really do teach people across campus and in our communities. And I thought that was a very, very important thing for us to be doing. And I feel as though we need to foster a very safe environment. So I also said, I don't care who they are. They can be young, they can be old, they can be of any sexual orientation or gender or whatever. I don't care who you are. I want to help you be better, and I want to help you learn. And I don't know exactly how I said it in that moment, but that's kind of what I went with, and she accepted it, and we moved on to other questions. And I was mostly just thankful that happened. But after a while, I started really thinking about this teaching philosophy thing, and I was like, the more I think about it, so I worked in marketing, and I worked in PR, and I've worked in a lot of creative areas. So marketing brain sort of kicked in, and I was like, wait, teach them is kind of a great tagline for a faculty member, but I've got to explain what that means. It's kind of like the Nike just do it, and then they have this whole line of stuff that they do, right? So it was kind of that for me. So now teach them has become that for me. So my teaching philosophy is guided by a simple yet powerful belief of teach them. Our job is to teach people, not just students, but also our staff, faculty, and community. We are here to teach them regardless of who they are, where they come from, how old they are, or how they identify. Teaching is not just about transferring knowledge, it's about creating an environment where everyone can learn, grow, and succeed. That's it. That's my teaching philosophy. That guides the way that I approach all of this. So the next question is, why does a teaching philosophy, or why does an education philosophy matter? And the thing it does for me is it really guides my teaching practices, or it guides the way that I interact with anyone on campus when it comes to teaching and learning. Now, being a director of a Center for Teaching and Learning, I use that phrase a lot, but essentially no matter what you do on a campus, your job is to assist with teaching and learning. That's just what we do. That's what a community college is. It's all about teaching and learning. So it also enhances student engagement and their learning, and it supports professional growth and career advancement. A clear philosophy about your teaching practice really helps you make decisions about curriculum. It helps you make decisions about classroom management, about student interactions, and so I'm big on inclusivity and people being comfortable. So I don't think that a person can learn without being comfortable where they are. There is a level of uncomfortability. Sure, I'm not even going to cut that out of the video. There's a level of that you have to have with learning, I feel, but not for the reasons that people typically have it. I'm okay with people being uncomfortable with maybe expanding their knowledge, or uncomfortable because maybe it seems hard. I'm not okay with them being uncomfortable because they don't feel accepted or okay to be in a place. So one of my main things is I feel like if people want to learn, they have to be comfortable where they are. So that's something I want to help provide. So in the ways that I think it enhances student learning is I think it's about you being authentic. And I think there's something to be said about an instructor or an employee, anyone working in education that's coming from a very thoughtful and consistent place. I know that when I really kind of developed this and started embracing it and was better at understanding why I was doing the work I was doing and why I cared so much about these certain things, when I really laid it out for myself, it helps the student feel trust in your instructor because they feel that you value what you're doing. Your education philosophy supporting professional growth and career development really comes from things like I have done. I have my education philosophy on my website. I have done presentations about it. I kind of put it anywhere where this part of my life sort of exists because I think it's a very identifying piece of the way I approach education. And maybe if someone is or isn't on board with that, then maybe they want or don't want me involved in a project. So that's kind of my approach in that. It also, it allows you to really think about long-term goals. So when really deep moments come up, you can look back at this philosophy that's at least written down and it's something that you've developed through, and you can really think about, okay, here's an opportunity. Does this make sense for me? What am I giving up for it? Am I going to be able to do something more than I could do before? So I was a full-time computer science faculty member, and I started working in our Title III grant as a teaching technology person because I have a background in technology. And that was an easy one for me. I was like, well, okay, I'm teaching technology. I'm going to help faculty with technology. I was already doing those kinds of things, so it wasn't too big of a stretch for me. Becoming the director of the center, though, was not really on my bingo card. A couple of people left, a retirement happened, and I was asked if I was interested in becoming the director of the center. And it was really funny because I was talking to my wife one day about it, trying to figure out if this is something I wanted to do. And she made an interesting point to me that made me say yes, and I wanted the job. And a conversation we had had multiple times was I found myself a little frustrated in my classroom. I was teaching a computer science program. It was very small. I didn't have a huge impact on students, or at least I didn't have a huge impact on a large number of students. I always thought it was interesting. I have a friend that's an English faculty member, and she might have 200 students in a semester. And I was like, well, because this is a very small program, I have about 18 students and I teach all of their classes. So I see, I'm impacting about 18 students. And I was like, I really wish I could do something that impacted more students. And it was funny because I was telling my wife, I was like, I just don't know that this director of a center thing is really down my alley. And she was like, what's the big thing that you really want out of education? What's the big thing that you want to do? And I was like, I want to help students be better. I want to help students. I want to teach students. And she said, okay, how many students are you impacting right now? And I said, I don't know, 18 to 20 a semester-ish. And she said, cool. How many students are at the institution? And I was like, at the time it was like 1,200 or so. And she's like, so if you became the director of the center, your job is to help faculty members be better so they can teach their students. And I said, well, yeah. And she said, so you'd be impacting 1,200 students instead of 18? And I just went, yeah, I guess so. So it was my teaching philosophy. It was part of that whole thing that really made me realize that this was kind of a direction I needed to go. So it can really help in so many different ways for you just getting your mind in a place to understand how to address sometimes very difficult situations when they come up. As I started thinking about how to break this down, so I really wanted this presentation to be something that I could break down the process I took. I went a very long route. I had a very long education philosophy, and then I brought it down to something a little shorter, brought it down to something a little shorter. I kind of expanded it at one point. I used AI to kind of rewrite it, and then it just didn't sound like me at all. So I've reworked this thing multiple times a year since creating the concept of teach them in my first version. I'm pretty happy with the version I have now, but if you ask me what it is 6 to 8 months from now, it could very well be different. I think the fundamental parts are the same. It's just how I'm saying it. So I kind of, when I was breaking it down, there's sort of three parts. I think there's values, I think there's personality, and then there's authenticity. So with values, these are sort of non-negotiables. This is a fundamental thing that guides your decisions. So say that integrity is one of your values. That's, one of those main things for you. You may specifically spend your time fostering an environment of academic integrity. Or I have a great friend, English teacher, and one of her things that she got from her mother and just the way that she was raised is kindness. And this is something that is a very important thing to her. And she uses that to guide a lot of the decisions about how she operates as a faculty member. So then you have personality. I've done a whole presentation on personal branding, and it's part education philosophy, and it's part like the fun stuff, the personality part, the thing that makes you you. But I think it's part of your education philosophy. I think that's a thing. I mean, part of the reason that the fundamental part of my education philosophy was teach them is one, anxiety, but also I'm kind of a branding nerd. And once I sort of spat that out, I thought to myself, actually, I can make this work. Let's workshop this. So if you're naturally humorous, right, maybe you are more engaging and relatable in that kind of way. Again, same English teacher, love her to death. She was wearing a shirt, and for the life of me, it was a shirt about the Oxford comma. She has another one about Edgar Allan Poe. She has a number of shirts that are very English oriented, and they're adorable. And one day I looked at her and I was like, oh my God, that shirt is adorkable. I don't know why I said adorkable, but it was just this nerdy little approach to her English thing. And it was just super cute. And I was like, that could be a thing though. If that's your jam, then it might be your thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. So there's definitely a piece of this that's part personality. So then you have authenticity. And this has to be real. That's the fundamental thing about your education philosophy. It's a fundamental thing about your personal brand. If it's not authentic, students and people you're trying to connect with and trying to educate are going to see straight through it. They just are. Humans are good at that thing. They are good at detecting complete fakeness. We see it all the time. And it's important to be authentic. It allows you to be honest with yourself, honest with those that you work with. And I think this might be the most important piece of the whole thing. Values are very important. They're non-negotiable. It's a guiding thing. Personality is where the human part of it comes in. And then authenticity is really just owning it. And if you're able to pull those three things together, then I think you can really develop something that seriously matters to you. And I think that is, you have to have that if you're going to have an education philosophy. You just do. So let's talk about the key aspects of building a successful education philosophy. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be open to feedback. And you really have to consider that anything can contribute to embracing authenticity, including weaknesses. The reason I say you have to be honest with yourself is it's important for you to build this around who you are, not who you think you should be. It can be that you can build this around who you want to be, but don't do it based on who you should be. I went through a time frame where I thought I should be the guy in a suit and wearing a tie because I wanted to move into administration out of faculty. And that's just not my jam. That's not the way I operate. I can do it when there's a big system board meeting or something. I can put on a suit, I can put on a tie, but often I still skip the tie. It's not really me, and you can tell that it's not really me. And while very simplistic way of putting it, it's an important part of it. And to really look at yourself and to give yourself some kind of a self-assessment. And that's honestly the hardest part about building an education philosophy. Is you have to think about why you're working in education. Why did you take this job? Why do you love your students? Or why do you do the things you do? I was very aggressive early in my career, and I would get upset in meetings, and it was just, I really was kind of aggressive, and I was a bit of a jerk. I've said this to people before. It was kind of a thing. I've never been proud of that part of my brand, but that's kind of where it was. And when I started breaking this down, I had to start thinking about, why was I so aggressive? Why did I do this? Why did feelings come up in a way that made me feel that way? Because they really were reactions to feelings. Like, it would be something I would look at after the fact and go, wow, you went a little hard on that. And then I started thinking about why. And I'm a first generation student. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I was one of the first people in my family to graduate high school on time. I was the first person to take a college class. I was the first person to get an associate's degree. I was the first person to get a bachelor's degree. I was the first person to get a master's degree. I was the first person to take postgraduate classes. I'm probably not going to get a doctorate. So one of my cousins that are teachers now, hopefully one of them get the luxury of being the first doctor in the family. But up until that point, my family were either in the military or they were manual laborers. And education kind of changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. I don't know where I would be right now. I don't know. It wouldn't be in this situation, and I love this situation. I wouldn't be with my wife. I met her at a college. I wouldn't be the kind of person that I am, and I wouldn't be helping people in the same way that I'm able to do so if it wasn't for education allowing me to do that. And I realized that a lot of the students that we serve in community colleges they're me. That's the way I was raised, very poor. I was raised in an uneducated family. I didn't know how college worked. I didn't understand. I was a terrible student. All of the things. I had to have financial aid for every one of my degrees. If you describe an Arkansas community college student, you could see also Blayne in his youth. Like, that was it. And I realized that there are some moments in conversations where my approach to interacting with students and working for students is, I'm here to make things easier on them, even if it makes it harder on me. And when I would get aggressive in these meetings, and because of certain situations, would be situations where it felt like people were making decisions for themselves, not for the students. And I have learned over time that that's the reason I reacted that way. I still have those internal natural reactions. I have matured, and I have taken the time to figure out how to say those things in a politically correct way, a non-aggressive way, but a forceful way still, and still get my point across that I'm trying to help the students and I'm trying to better their lives. And I'm okay with taking on more work and my job being harder if it's better for them. It took me being very honest with myself to figure out why I was being a complete and utter jerk, and that I really needed to fix that. That despite me in the back of my head going, that's a great reason to be upset, it's not a good reason to be aggressive. So the other thing is consider feedback. My wife was one that pointed that out to me. She was with me in a meeting one day and she was like, you got worked up about that. And I was like, well, why don't they want to help the students? Something to that effect. And I started breaking that down and realizing that that's what was happening. And it took me many years, and I'm still working on reversing the fact that so many people think I'm just a complete jerk. In my personal branding presentation, someone asked me the question of what happens if you do all of this the wrong way. And I admitted in that moment that I am a person that did it the wrong way. I built a very negative brand that I'm still coming back from many years later. So you got to be honest with yourself, and you got to take feedback, even student feedback. So I had, especially in my early years, I didn't have great student feedback in certain circumstances. And I had to really think about why I was reacting the way I was and how to fix that. The other thing is embracing your authenticity again. And I'm going to talk about that a lot, but even weaknesses can be a benefit. So I'm super introverted. I'm very, very introverted. It's very difficult for me to even record to a camera, let alone in front of people. I've taught myself to do it. I've kind of gotten over it because it's a path to helping people the way I would like to help people. But something I found is in my teaching, my introverted nature made me really be supportive to other students that are introverted. I'm not going to make you get up in front of the class and introduce yourself, but I do make them do it over, in online classes. I ask a name, but I don't go kind of crazy with it. I get the bare minimum of what needs to happen to have interactions and things. But one of the ways I do this is I give students a way to reflect on the course material in a private way just with me. I give them some one-on-one time. Instead of everything being a public discussion post, I have some internal reflection pieces where I ask them, I specifically say, this is communication between you and your instructor. No one else can see it. And I ask them to reflect on the information I'm teaching them in real world human, their life. And when I started doing that, I really started seeing some of my more introverted students kind of open up and really discuss how things were working for them. And they started to learn a little better. And so I kind of embraced what would be considered a weakness on my side of the world for, kind of helping those students that feel the same way. So let's talk about defining what matters to you. And the first step is identifying those core values. And I have some words that I'll put up on the screen that I kind of came up with. I came up with 10 or 12 of them. I used AI to sort of give me some extra ones that really work. I was struggling. I was in a brain space that was not allowing me to come up with words that day. I don't know. AI is great for stuff like that, right? So to give you an example of how this might make a difference for you is, say one of the values for you is you feel very strongly about collaboration. So you're going to probably put more group work and peer-to-peer interactions and peer learning kind of things in your courses. And despite having just talked about being an introvert, I still appreciate people that are able to do that and make it interesting. It's a hard thing for me to do, but I think it's great when it's done well. And if you are all about collaboration, then maybe that's one of your words that you need to write down and say, okay, collaboration is one of my values. That's one of my non-negotiables. Maybe creativity or curiosity is something for you, and you design lessons that foster more of a sense of exploration and wonder. Maybe you kind of just encourage that. Maybe despite you teaching a class that doesn't necessarily lean towards creativity, maybe you implement some of that. I like implementing creative stuff. I teach programming, which can be very, very linear and very strict. And I let my students do wild things. I mean, there was one semester in a high school concurrent programming class that they talked about food all semester. I don't know why. I guess because it was in the morning, they were all hungry. I think they all were skipping breakfast or something. I have no idea. I needed to teach them about random number generators, and I was trying to figure out how I'm going to teach these high school kids random number generators. And I realized that an easy way to teach random number generator is have it to select stuff out of a list. So it just picks a random number and that becomes the thing. So we sat down as a class, and for me to teach them how to do random number generator, I taught them how to make a sandwich creator. So we sat down and came up with like 10 different breads, and we came up with 10 different meat toppings and 10 different vegetable toppings, and we came up with 6 or 7 different cheeses and then a bunch of condiments, and then we programmed a random number generator that would pull from those lists and make a sandwich. And it was sort of a hilarious lesson that they learned how to do the random number generator and how to implement it and how to make this work. And it's a very important part of programming, but at the same time, they kind of had a fun time with a food thing because they had been talking about food all semester, and the sandwiches that it came up with were just obnoxious. And I think one had like peanut butter and some kind of weird spinach thing with like, it was not great, but it got the point across, and it was very fun. And it was just an important part of, you know, them learning how to do it and embracing what I saw along the way and kind of adding a creative thing to what could have been a very tedious lesson. So when you're looking at these values, pick 3 to 5 that resonate with you. Write down like a little note. Why are they important to me? Why do they influence your work? And then just kind of put that off to the side. Now we're going to talk about embracing what makes you, you. I think the way that I put it in my personal branding presentation was, think about the things that a 12-year-old would make fun of you for. And as an adult, that's probably the thing that makes you cool, or at least it makes me feel like I'm cool. And maybe those are some of the kinds of things that you think about when you're going through this process. Here's a list of personality traits, and you don't have to limit yourself to the list. You can come up with whatever you want to. This kind of is just there to sort of help trigger your mind to start thinking about it. So this is a situation where you might consider any of these to be part of it. So you've had those instructors, or you've known those instructors that are very funny, and that's sort of their thing. But there's a lot of interactivity and humor kind of integrated into the way that they teach. And maybe someone like me who I really want students to reflect more on this content. How does it impact my real life? What does that matter in the way that I do things every day? So just keep those things in mind. I know a couple of instructors that really want to be welcoming. They want it to be easy for students to talk to them and interact with them, and they want it easy to be in their classroom. So think about those things. And again, let's go back to select 3 to 5 things that really resonate with you. Embrace your quirks. Embrace those things that a 12-year-old would make fun of you for. And then how do those things impact your interactions with students, or your interactions with education, or whatever stakeholder you interact with? Again, you don't have to be an instructor for this to be impactful with the way that you interact in education. Let's talk about merging values and personality. So if we look at values plus personality, if you have innovation and creativity, maybe you're all about making very dynamic lessons. If you are about empathy and patience, maybe you are someone that goes out of their way to create a very supportive learning environment. Maybe if you're about inclusivity and passion, you give the most engaging and wonderful lectures. There's a lot here that you can work with and really start pulling those pieces in and saying, I want to accomplish this, and this is my personality trait. How can I take those things, and what do they mean? What does that mean in my classroom? What does that mean when I'm in meetings? What does that mean about my presentations? What does that mean about my day-to-day activities in education? It really relies on thinking about those non-negotiable values and integrating your personality with those things, and how does that come up. And if that's a struggle, if you have one part and you have the other part and you're not sure how to blend them together, that's where peer feedback is really great, or any kind of feedback. Or even if your feedback is AI-based feedback, there are plenty of different sources where even if you're not sure how those things connect, that we can kind of take them and go, oh, here's a way that they can connect. Here's a way that we can make meaning from something that is valuable to me and a personality trait that I have. Being true to yourself enhances teaching effectiveness. It just does. We all see it. Benefits to authenticity are things like it builds trust with your students. If they know that you're sincere, if they know you're being real, they're going to open up to who you are, and they're going to appreciate that. It encourages a genuine connection. It also helps you stay motivated. There is something to be said about not putting on an act all the time that it doesn't tire you out as much. Me trying to be the guy in the suit and the tie was exhausting because it just wasn't me. Because there was personality traits that came with that are just not my natural personality traits. They just aren't. So keep that in mind. It also provides a model for students. We want our students to be authentic. We want them to be real to themselves. We want them to really understand the world and how they exist in it and what they are in it. We want them to be humans, especially with the advent of AI. We really need to push that human connection. And there's something about being authentic that also means you're writing your own papers and not using AI to do it, because I want to know your thoughts, not a computer's thoughts. I want you to reflect on your life, not something that's made up by an AI. And I adore AI, but I want humanity out of humans. So model that for your students. I think it's just it sounds simple. It's harder to do than it sounds like it is, but I mean, authenticity builds trust. It encourages connection. It helps you stay motivated, and it really does provide a great model for students for them to move forward with. Okay, so let's talk about the hard part. We're trying to draft your philosophy, and I'm going to tell you straight up, your original one is probably not going to be great. It's going to be really long. Mine was absurd, and it took me a lot of time to break it down into something smaller. So I'm going to give you a structure that probably doesn't need to be the structure that it ends up being in. I told you what mine was. I showed it to you on the screen. That is not the structure that mine follows. But I think when you're developing it, these are kind of important things to have. So your outline for your philosophy, you need an introduction. And this it's just introducing yourself to yourself, if you will. It's kind of a weird way to say it, but it's just a brief statement about who you are, what your values are. It kind of brings that value piece in a little bit. And then the next thing is you want to look at your core beliefs about teaching and learning. So what principles guide your approach to education? That's essentially what we're saying. And remember that when you take this approach, you can just write notes, you can write full narratives. You've got to get it out, and maybe not on paper. Maybe you say it to a camera. Maybe you just talk it and maybe have AI transcribe it into something for you. Maybe you type it over time. You use the Notes app on your phone as you think about things the rest of the day or for the next few weeks. Think about your student interactions. Well, how do you want to embody these things to your students? How do you want to present these personality traits and these values? How do you want to present this stuff to your students? You really need to think about, how do you want to present it in your professional setting? I'm going to say to students, again, a lot. I've worked with students for a lot of years, but this goes for no matter where you are on the spectrum of where we work in education. Administrators, support staff, faculty, this is all true. And it's just, what do you want that to be? So the other thing you got to think about is, what are your goals for your students? And I mean this for everyone. We're all working towards students graduating, but are we working towards students walking across a stage, or are we working towards students being better humans? Are we working towards the goal of students gaining skills that allow them to get jobs? There's some combination of all of that, but take note of what your goals are. What part of that are you providing for students on your side? And then what is your commitment to growth? How do you plan to evolve as an educator? How are you moving forward? You may add that to your philosophy, you may not, but it's an interesting thing to think about that may impact other parts of your teaching philosophy. So now we're putting it together, right? Make sure to write in your own voice and include personal stories. I got lucky. I have the weird story about the teach them thing. I will tell that story 100 times until it is a story that nobody wants to hear anymore, because it was really an interesting moment for me, if we're being honest. And it's a personal story. Tell stories about students. Tell stories about when you got feedback about something. It's kind of like when my wife looked at me and said, do you want to keep serving 18 students or do you want to help the whole institution? And I'm just like, oh, yeah, that's a great point. That's why she's smarter than me. The other thing is avoid generic statements. Make it specific to you, right? We like buzzwords. We like acronyms in higher education. Education in general. I kind of make the argument to avoid them where you can. You can talk about those subjects, but figure out a way to say it in your voice. How would you say those things? Sometimes we can't get away from the words. Like, that's the way that you do it. I get that. But don't go too buzzwordy. Don't go too industry terms with it, if those are part of your values and personality and part of this whole process. Maybe in your first draft, you have to go with that. And then part of your later time with it is really pulling that apart and rephrasing it and making it sound like you. So in that vein, reflecting and refining. This is the part that is continuous. It's all about continuous improvement. And I say that, I think, because I come from a programming background and that was sort of my approach. I would build something and I wouldn't go, cool, there it is, let's put it on a shelf. I would continually improve on it based on, oddly enough, feedback and user experience and things like that. And I sort of take that approach with my education philosophy. I get feedback. I see things that change in me as a person. I see things that change in education as a whole. Oddly enough, I think AI has made me refocus some of my approaches to more humanistic approaches for students. Again, your philosophy is a work in progress. It will hopefully always be a work in progress. I don't think you print it out and put it on your desk and go, that's me from now on. I also say to simplify, refine, simplify, and revise. And the reason is I gave you that big, get all of your stuff in there. And then it's like, okay, is there anything to cut out? Maybe there's not. Maybe there's some refinement where it's like, okay, I can say these things in a shorter, more concise kind of way. Or maybe not. Maybe this part is super important and it just needs to be said the way it is. You're probably not going to get down to a 2-word thing. And even me with a 2-word education philosophy, I still have to explain it with 3 or 4 paragraphs because it's cool, but it doesn't really mean anything. It does after I explain it to you, and I can continue the rest of a presentation and say, teach them, and you understand what I mean. But it takes that explanation for it to make any sense. And then revisit it regularly. This is something that will change constantly. Consider it a living document. Put it somewhere on a personal cloud drive so you always have it. Stick it in the notes on your phone. Put it somewhere where you can kind of comment on it to yourself as you think of things and as you think that maybe things are changing, or as you change, or as you learn something new, or you get new feedback. I think that really is the important part, is to be authentic to your education philosophy. I think you have to continuously change it with you because you're continuously changing as a human being. And it's as simple as that, right? This is you as an educator, and as you change, it should change. It helps guide you. You guide it. It's like a personal mission statement almost, for lack of a better way to put it. I think that's the easiest way to really think about the whole thing. So that's kind of what I have if you all have any questions, feel free to reach out. I will happily answer any questions. And I will put my website up at the end of this. If you're seeing this, you probably came across it through my website. I usually have a contact form. Fill out the contact form, find me at my institution, make a comment on the video on YouTube or wherever else I might post it. And yeah, I'll do my best to respond and offer advice and give you feedback. And most of all, good luck and be real to yourself. That's the most important advice that I can give you.